Hello, hello, and welcome back. I am so glad you're here. This Mind, Body, Soul Mastery is a space where we explore what it really means to live with intention and from the heart and walk through life with a deep connection to mind, body, and soul. Whether I'm sitting down with someone whose story moves me or I'm just sharing what I'm learning in real time, my hope is that you'll hear something that invites you back to yourself. So take a deep breath. Let's drop in. And today's conversation is with Daniel Darman. And Daniel is a chronic questioner and made a lifelong commitment to finding answers to his deepest questions of reality. He connected beyond situations by delving into the root of his problems. I love that. He leaned in. He began understanding how his emotions became disconnected from his mind, how his major health challenges manifested in early childhood, and how suffering plays a key teaching role in the soul's path towards growth and ultimately transcendence. Daniel is the co founder of Truth of You. You may remember listening to his partner, Elinor Moshe, on an earlier episode. Daniel is a practicing mystic, astrologer, tarot reader, and quantum healing hypnosis practitioner. Daniel, welcome to the Mind, Body, Soul Mastery podcast.
Thank you, Brenda. It's great to be here.
I love having you here, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. So let's just dive right in because we just do that here. Nothing shallow, no surface level stuff. And I just want you to take us to that pivotal moment in your life where something shifted so deeply that your life
Yeah,
began to change.
yeah, sure. So the part that you spoke about, we are certified in, or at least I am fully in quantum healing hypnosis technique, which is a type of healing that works with multidimensionality and
Mm,
particularly levels of the subconscious that have deeper and deeper layers to it. And if you're not aware, our story actually involves past lives and coming back together in this life to find love and learn how to grow together. But doing this work, not only on clients, but practicing on each other, we've been able to explore different levels of depth and understanding and connection to ourselves beyond just the everyday level. And I'm getting to a point now where I can take it into a fairly mystical state that's fairly it's far removed from here while still being grounded in the sense of myself
hmm
and being able to explore not only past lives but even elements like childhood and memories that you either forgot or perhaps they were very stressful or even traumatic and you just blocked them out as a
mm,
as a survival mechanism. There's been the ability to revisit a lot of these under the context of perceiving it as an adult and in a way that can be detached from it as well. And so when you mention the disconnection from the emotions, it's sort of it's sort of the knife cuts both ways. It's difficult, but at the same time, you can keep your emotions aside quite easily to be able to actually view a situation and like how would someone else feel there? Because I've noticed that my ability to connect with others emotionally is very, very strong. But then to respect my own emotions as a separate entity is just like it still has that challenge. So the big one for me was having the awakening of the totality of this life as well. Now, Eleanor mentioned the idea of my lot in life in that episode, and that's one that was an enormous revelation because when I was younger, at the surface, it just seemed like another life. But deep within, there was already that rift occurring very deeply. And there were three major signs that I look back to now that were obvious. Number one was I was gaining a lot of weight, even though I was playing sports and being active. The second one was that I was biting my nails till they were bleeding. And the third was social issues and and it's more social struggles. And how I really just found myself coping was escapism. And that's why video games came up before. They're a way to lose yourself from this reality as well.
mm,
And really being able to connect with all of those three at the same time in an altered state of awareness was really powerful, because what you can do is you can get not only other memories that can come back and support it, but you can actually connect to a deeper state of your being that's not just mental, it's not just physical, it's not just emotional. It's the synthesis of all of them and more. And it can be very overwhelming if you're not ready or you're not grounded for it. But basically, I got given, it was sort of a logical progression of, well, how did this happen? And the food was because I was getting ungrounded internally. The biting of the nails was a sign. It was it was for a child, it was a type of self-harm.
Mm-hmm.
We look at teenagers, using other forms, and we're like, oh my God, that's so severe. But an innocent little child biting their nails doesn't look like self-harm. It just looks like a bad habit. But if it's to the point that there's blood, then obviously it's a type of
Yeah.
self-mutilation, as my higher self described it. And the social struggles were because of just the culminating stress that was shutting down the executive function. The whole interface with Daniel Darman was one that was actually becoming difficult to hold in its full state. And so video games offer that outlet where, you take it at your own pace. It's no one's here to put pressure on you, or you need to get these grades, or you need to, go do
Mm.
this later, or you're in control. You can do it at your own pace. And so basically with that, it was a logical progression, and I don't have my notes on how it all worked. But it basically was getting back to um, the concept of you can't you can't basically manage these things because you can't ultimately breathe right. And
Mm.
this is something that a lot of people take for granted. People look at breath work in the spiritual space, for example, and they're just like, yeah, it helps relax the nervous system and this and that. But really, if we think of the term of the word spirit, in Latin, I believe it means like the breath. And so it really gets back to the breath. I mean, even, and I don't necessarily want to take this religious, but at the start of the book of Genesis in the Holy Bible, God said, "Let there be light."
Mm.
The universe was created through speech and the breath, and so even understanding that you can't breathe right at the 3D level is really just a case of it might disrupt your nervous system, your hormones, and things like this. But at a deeper level, to the non-physical elements of our being, it dysregulates the flow. And it was happening to me at multiple levels, and I could begin to see how all of that was playing out at the deeper level at the same time. And the reason I ultimately couldn't breathe right is because I couldn't even begin to look at myself in this life and who I was incarnated as.
How old were you when you figured out you couldn't breathe right and that was because you couldn't see yourself clearly?
That was actually at the start of this year. So there was already so much work that had to go into it to get to a point that I could go deep enough to be able to sort of, it's sort of 30,000 foot view to be able to
Yeah.
objectively see it, but it's really on the ground as well, so that you're in the experience. You're not detached from it as well. It's a little bit paradoxical to be in that sort of deep state of
Yeah.
trance, because at one stage, one moment you're outside watching it, the next moment you're in as it.
Yeah. So tell me, what was that when that happened earlier this year, when you realized that you were using video games as escapism? And I think you said this was like around age 7. So at age 7, right? Isn't that what we talked about in the pre-call? Right?
Yeah.
That's when you've been able to pinpoint when you were really disconnecting from yourself in this life. But you didn't realize that until, decades later at this year, right? So what was and maybe it's hard because I understand that you're getting all of this awareness and this knowledge in that hypnotic state, right? But yet, my guess is when you come out of that hypnotic state, you are able to know what your feelings were, and that's when some of the processing has to happen, correct?
Well, it can happen during it too.
Okay.
Now, in this case, all it was for me during that state was the undercurrent or the underpinning of that grounding, silent stillness. During this time, my voice was a whisper. Normally, I talk full volume when I'm in trance state to make sure the recording's, high enough volume. But for this, there was a relaxation that came over me that I haven't really felt in this life. And so
Mm.
if you like, I'm happy to sort of go over how I've sort of mapped the sequence of how it occurred, because it's not just enough to know how the disconnect's happening, it's well, what actually started. So basically, I was able to gain insight to a state of pre-memory. And this is another thing as well. We don't actually recognize and reconcile the fact that who we are begins before we have the memory of ourselves
Mm.
in this incarnation too. And I could only describe it as, what was it? The Great Separation, where basically there was, imagine like an enormous stone door closing you off to spirit, the spirit world, so to speak. I was very connected, and it was somewhere between 1 and 3. I don't think there was anything that happened in here. I don't think I had any traumatic experiences that I can pin on anyone or say you had a part to play in this. Not that I want to anyway, but that was very, very difficult for me at a deeper level that I'm still trying to connect with and understand and work through. But from there, the challenges start to manifest here, because it's a type of abandonment, really. If we're one with all that is all the time, to
It's an
have a
abandonment
constructed,
of, yeah,
yeah,
it's an abandonment of who you are, where we came from. But isn't that the human experience?
yeah, of course, and we all
Isn't
choose
that
our own
what we're here
flavors
to do?
for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why as well, because ultimately everything serves something larger than itself, which we then have the invitation through the hero's journey to grow into that larger version of ourselves as well.
Yeah.
But the type of abandonment it was from the Divine Mother. And
Mm.
so I spent a lot of my life, latching onto and really exalting um, the feminine and women, in a sense of, like everyone can see that women are the beautiful ones, visually, and men not so much. But there's an element of the feminine beauty, of the richness of the emotions, of the intuition and the flow of that energy that I always loved and respected. But to have that loss of connection through spirit to that energy is one that I tried to chase the cheap substitute. Now, my family is just another family. They're not perfect. They don't capture the essence of divinity in its highest form. Most don't, even myself. It's again, as you said, it's just part of the human experience, but the ideals still remain at a deeper level within us too. And so basically the stress started surfacing. It might just be irritability. It might not be sleeping right. It might be having a big one for me was digestive issues. And through our work as well, even connecting with the idea of digestive issues represent the spiritual principle of you're not processing something, because that's what digestion does.
Mm.
It takes information, it takes data, it takes calories, it takes whatever, and it processes it into something else you can use. And if you're not doing that at all, there's a stagnation and ultimately a type of toxicity that arises. So there's a lot of clues we can get through the body if we can understand how to interpret the language of how spirit
Right.
speaks through the body. And something like the nails, why that was chosen for the biting, was revealed as not only just a form of self-harm, but it's very obvious to see. When you shake
Mm.
hands or you're writing, you can't hide the hands very well. And so it was the way that I was trying to signal. And I had no idea. I was just doing it. A lot of people that pick up these sort of bad habits don't even know why they're doing it. And it's because it wasn't them at the 3D manifest level that started it. So how can they know the cause?
Right. Well, and
Yeah,
also, if you're 7, you don't have the capacity to look deeper, right?
yeah, and my parents, they didn't really understand fully what was happening. And it was, we'll get the stop and grow for your nails. So if you go and try and bite it, it'll taste awful. And we had moved to a new town around new people. And because I was already stressed, it sort of tipped me over the edge. My grades started to to fall, in which then I, in a compensatory manner, tried to, block out other areas of my life just to do well in school, just to, to keep the fear of God away from me. But you could see that instability playing out through the lived experience as well. And it was around, I'd say between 7 and then by sort of age 9, it was sort of solidified, a deep sense of rift between the emotions of the human and the emotions of the higher self, the soul, the oversoul, the deeper layers. I haven't fully mapped all of it out yet, but the connection to them was no longer able to be felt in my lived experience by that age.
So 7 until what? So 2 decades?
No, well,
From
2 years.
2
Like,
years. Okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
I would say it was around 7 to 8 that really it was getting very, very stressful. And then sort of by 9, my parents split and my dad left, and I didn't even understand why. I was like, well, if you're not happy here, then I don't understand why you'd want to stay in the first place. Okay, can I go back to playing Super Mario? And it's like,
Right.
your father just left, and like, you don't understand what that means. You watch movies and the kids, like, they really understand what their parents are doing. And I know it's just a movie, but that wasn't my experience. And even now I have to work hard to still connect with what that means.
Right. No, what I was going for was this, you were 7, and then this awareness came to you of what was really happening. It was this disconnection from the soul spirit, right?
Mm.
That was that 10 years, 15 years? Trying not to
Well,
ask you how old you
yeah,
are.
yeah. Well, as I said, sort of like it looks like it started sort of pre-memory around 1 to 3 years old.
Yeah.
It was getting it hit a really steep part around 7. And then by 9, I think a lot of the spiritual disconnection was complete.
And you were spiritually disconnected, right? Now
Yep.
you're connected, right? So now in this year,
Connecting,
you're connecting, right? And
refinding.
this awareness is coming, right? So I'm trying to figure what I guess what I'm asking is, so from like by 9, you were disconnected with your spirit and soul and all of that.
Yep.
And that lasted for a decade, that lasted for 15 years.
No,
So
well,
it's
I'm
just
36 now, so close to 3 decades.
3 decades. 2 decades if it were 9 to 30, 2 decades. So 2 decades of living disconnected. So now let's just focus on where you are now. You have this awareness, you've gone through this experience, you've realized, oh my gosh, I've just lived 2 decades disconnected. And you're kind of leaning into the why, right? Because that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're leaning into the why. You're getting a deeper understanding. You're getting you're just getting a really deeper understanding. And so, how has your body responded to this awareness now? And I totally get this. A lot of times I work with my clients and I just have to remind them and work. I don't do the hypnosis, but sometimes let's look at our problems and let's look at our situation as this third party observer, right? Let's take us out of the equation. Let's take us out of the emotion that's tied to it. And like, let's just look at it from a bird's eye view. What's happening here? That's what you're doing in hypnosis, right? So when you, what has your body, your mind and your body been able to process after you just like figured out what was happening? After you figured out what you were doing at between 7 and 9 and disassociating and disconnecting. Tell me
Well,
your
I yeah.
mind. Yeah.
Well, I feel there's an enormous missing piece from the puzzle, and that was essentially the stress culminated and then crescendoed when I turned 18. And that
Mm,
wasn't random either, because the level of stress that I was carrying, not just in the physical body, because you can work through that through somatics and stuff. Standard therapy can work well for the mind and even the emotions. Um, but the level of stress I was carrying through all the dimensions of my being culminated, and then basically when I turned 18, I felt I had a right to then have the collapse because no one would be responsible for me. at a
Mm.
deep spiritual level. I held on to it until I gave myself permission to say, no, I don't have to put this on anyone else. And so basically I went from being an A grade student, even though that had its own sort of side story, and I'd lost a lot of the weight. I was active. I was working. I did have a lot of plans. I was doing specialist maths, chemistry, and these really like sort of STEM fields that are quite intellectually rigorous. And to fall apart like that, people started rumor like I had one friend start a rumor that I was on drugs, which I actually thought was kind of funny until the school took it incredibly seriously because they had no way to describe the fact that someone who was active, full of energy, and high achieving was sitting in a corner and had no energy to keep their eyes open or move their body.
Mm.
And so even after going to doctors, getting the blood tests and basically saying, look, um, we don't really have an answer, but we're going to give it the diagnosis chronic fatigue syndrome because that fits the criteria. And so that's something that, to answer your question, plays a big role is understanding that the emotional breakdown, it was an emotional breakdown, but because I didn't connect with it, it felt like a physical or a physiological
Yeah,
breakdown
yeah, yeah.
in a non-ordinary sense. I didn't have anemia. I didn't have diabetes. I didn't have anything that could be explained through standardized testing. And basically, I was just told, go see a psychologist for, cognitive behavioral therapy and, start a graded exercise therapy program. And it's like, how does that help anything at all? Like, there was
S-
actually really no consideration for the emotional state as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
know that's the sad, sorry state of the medical world, isn't it?
well, it's the problem with materialist science. It's the idea is they only measure something after it's already happened and then try and
Hmm.
reverse engineer the cause from there. And that can work very well for a lot of things, but something like the human is not just a mechanical machine. We're something alive and living, and there's a high level of dynamics to us. Look at epigenetics. That's why genetics will never actually give us all the answers, because there's a level of ourselves that can override the gene expression, which ones turn on and off. And that's really where, the hard problem of consciousness comes in.
Hmm.
But really, what I've learned from this experience, and it's really a learned practice, because when I basically experience this, I'm like, right, I want the healing, I want to release this. And I basically got given, no, you have to work through it. You have to work your way up to us. You set your life up like this in a very specific way, sort of as your own hero's journey. And we want you to meet us, but we can't do the work for you because you set it up so no
Mm.
one can help you. No one can help
Yeah,
you and no one can save you. And it's like, that hits hard. But at the same time, I'm like,
yeah.
right, that's my lot in life. You set up your own you bought a Rubik's Cube, you tangled it all, like you messed it all up, and you're like, right, now I have to solve it again.
So what did you do at 18?
So at 18, I fell apart. Like I left school. I couldn't go to school. I tried to work. And I spent really most of my adult life just trying to start life unsuccessfully.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
really, I didn't really sort of go anywhere. I couldn't build a career. I couldn't really stick through education because there was something that just couldn't be explained. And it was looking back, I think it was rather uncomfortable for my family as well to have like, well, what happened to him? Well, I don't know. But no one wanted to ask. Like no one really asked those questions because they don't know that part of that depth of themselves. And that's also
Right,
how I set it up.
right.
I set it up in a way
Yeah.
that they wouldn't be able to help me either. So it's like at one level, I'm not responsible, but at another, I am. And that's sort of this paradox with like the hero's journey, for example. Are you responsible for your own suffering? And it's like, no. But at another level, yes. And it's a
Yes.
very hard truth for people to accept.
Yes.
And it's not just that they've set it up in the past. There are some things that we do before we incarnate that I've come to awareness of that we set up, but there's a lot in between that we still have the free will for, and that is our choice if we choose to claim it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now I'm at a point where what's happening is things are coming back hard and fast. That connection to spirit is awakening and blooming every day. I'm learning to not just do breath work for the sake of just doing breath work and calming the nervous system, but recognizing that it's sort of like there's an attenuation between the different levels of myself, and they're out of sync with each other. And it's like, let's bring them
Mm,
into harmony so I can actually go deep with myself in every moment of every day. And that's when I actually began to realize that, well, what's the point of spirituality and spiritual work? And to me, it was nothing more than just feeling alive. That is the power of now. It's the fact that
yeah,
you can actually be a living being and not just one who's suffering with health issues, not just suffering with confusion, and not just suffering from disconnection, but it's the fact that you can actually bring this back online. And so, I've been able to learn a lot, and not only do we offer QHHT, there's a whole other variety of models we're bringing online as well, not just for understanding and mapping the nature of our multidimensional selves, such as soul contract numerology and astrology and such, but being able to integrate them, meet ourselves, like once we bring ourselves back into that harmony with our deeper layers, then we can begin to open a dialogue outside of these states of hypnosis, because they are us. They are here.
right, right.
And they don't have to be something that just gets seen as the subconscious, or the unconscious is just something that hides in the corner. No, it is you.
Hell yeah, it's you, and it's listening to you all the time. So
And talking and
yeah,
guiding.
yeah, yeah. So your family and intuition and all this deeper spiritual stuff, not part of your upbringing whatsoever. So you've kind of come into this knowing, you've kind of come into this learning, being a seeker, trying to come out of this emotional breakdown that you at 18, right? So you've just sought out ways to help heal yourself.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, sort of. Yeah. I was raised Roman Catholic, and again, that cuts both ways. There's some elements of understanding the model of what these religious institutions through scripture are trying to get at, and it is spirit, and there is a lot of value in it. I'd say the institutions themselves, I mean, they're a bit more questionable. But after my parents split at 9, it was really just a case of, why did I follow any of that? The disconnection was
Yeah.
complete. And that's when I basically called myself atheist. And so, I fell into that materialist trap. I fell into the, science has the answer, and the grand unified theory will tell us how reality in the universe works. Um, and it really wasn't until 2016. So I would have been 28 then at the time. And I lost a lot of weight very quickly. Um, and in a good way, in a good controlled way, a lot of effort and such. But I basically started learning about metabolism. I started learning about health, and at the deeper level of human physiology and biochemistry. And I'm like, the food pyramid model is like, everyone knows there's a problem with it, but really understanding our vessels themselves, it can't be just reduced to, especially a pyramid as well, of a model. But that's when I began questioning everything. It started from there, and then it moved on to, I heard about Bitcoin, and I'm like, why does another form of money need to exist? And I looked into the white paper, and I looked into what it represents, and it's like a decentralized non-physical currency. And I'm like, in the digital age, oh, okay, I can start to see how a necessity for something like this is required. Um, but it didn't stop there. It then went into the medical industry, and you keep going down these rabbit holes, but making sure you don't get lost in just the conspiracy theory elements and taking that for hard truth. You have to also come back, and you have to live. And I've seen people that they're still caught up in this world, and in the or
Yeah.
in this paradigm of thinking. And if you fail to recognize that you've also set up all of that for yourself as well, it's another trap. And so where I was going with it as well is, it was just through working through the questioning that I was able to really ultimately bring it back to myself. And just to, there's so many ways I could say this, but It's recognizing that only once you reclaim who you are through the different layers that you can then begin to heal. And then
Mm-hmm.
once you can begin to heal, then you can begin to empower. And healing doesn't always look the same. It's not crying necessarily. It could be boundaries. It could be cutting
Mm-hmm.
cords with people. This is an element of a non-physical state of where we're connected to certain people. I was living at home until earlier this year at 35, and I was the traditional guy living in his mother's basement, sort of, so to speak. But no one really questioned. And it's like, well, why was that? And then once I understood in shamanism, the idea of energy cording through the astral
Mm.
dimension or higher. And you don't realize how these are energies that move both ways, for better or worse, for one party or
Right.
another. But those
Right.
cords also prevent that separation, because even if you physically move away, the energetic cords, they connect
Mm-hmm.
on a non-physical level.
Mm-hmm.
And so even boundary setting and asserting your own individuation and reclaiming that as well can then allow for the healing, and then after the healing, the empowerment. So now I'm at a
Yeah.
point where it's like, right, stuff to learn, things to do, life to start living again. And
Yeah.
with Elinor, it's such a wonderful experience as well, because we get to do this together. And we've had our own story as well of that disconnection, that isolation, the
Mm-hmm.
separation.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been great if this happened 15 years earlier, but at the same time, it had to happen as it must. And I can hold the gratitude for it now, but when you're in the thick of it subjectively, it's hard to step out. And
Yes,
this
it
is where,
is.
like, hypnosis helped us just go out of it just enough to be able to see it from the outside. So then we could rework our
Mm-hmm.
perception and relationship to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. Coming alive and living life like that. That's beautiful.
Mm.
It's inspiring.
Thank
So,
you.
Daniel, what would you say if you could say one thing was the biggest lesson or the biggest aha through your nine to now? Because it's been a lot. Like, I mean, you broke through a lot of the conditioning, a lot of the programming, a lot of the strongholds, right? That society and we whatever. You broke through a lot in a very short period of time, right?
Yeah, of course.
What's the biggest lesson?
The biggest lesson that I sort of haven't spoken to fully, but it was coming into an awareness of multidimensionality of ourselves. And even if it's just something as simple as your body, your mind, and your emotions are separate, but they're still part of you. So then what's the part of
Mm,
you that transcends all three of them? And you can keep doing that. And as I've done that work, really the answer comes back to you are an infinite co-creating being who is never born and never dies. And if you can truly learn to connect with that, then you can find the answer to anything and you can create anything.
would you say that's referring to your soul?
It is, but it's beyond that too, because the soul ultimately still has a level of separation. Because the soul is, we call it, like, we think of it as a creation, and then we think of God as the creator, which is still another type of duality. But if you go beyond the duality of creator and creation, then you really can just get the fact that you get lost in the sea of infinity as well. But recognize that you can tap into that to be able to see outside of anything and exist between any model, any paradigm, any perception, and any limitation.
Hmm. I'll have to think on that one.
Yeah, it's one that's very elusive at the surface level, but it's been the most powerful teaching and message I've ever received.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. So, one last question.
Sure.
If someone is sitting in a similar moment to where you were, disconnected, those behaviors that, the the gaining weight, the disconnection, the escapism, the self-harm, that kind of stuff. So if someone is out there right now, finds themselves, oh, I am doing those kinds of things. I'm doing those kinds of things. Huh. What would you gently offer them from your experience?
I mean, the principle in which I'd work through with that is something that Eleanor mentioned, and only love is real.
Hmm.
Being able to know the way we perceive and frame anything is crucial and is the root, is the seed of whatever you're doing, thinking, feeling. Is it from is it from a state of love or not? Because it's going to grow into a big tree, and it's going to be a beautiful tree with lots of tasty fruit, or it's going to grow into a thorny bush that's going to be prickly and very difficult to work
Yeah.
with. The thing is, understand how not only your past is created now, but understand how now is creating the future once this
Mm.
moment becomes the past. And
Right.
understand that love not only just for other people or other things, it's the ability to even learn to love yourself. And sometimes that can be forgiveness, sometimes that can be boundaries, sometimes that can be splurging, like retail therapy, for example. Just buying yourself some nice clothes to look good can work for some people.
And sometimes
Astrologically, I'd
it's,
look into people to find the a better answer, but
yeah. Well, and sometimes that too, that loving yourself is just grace and compassion for where you are right now.
yeah.
And just
And that's
acknowledge, you know?
and that comes full circle to the fact that you can't breathe because you can't look at yourself, Daniel. And not
Yeah.
looking at yourself is not actually loving yourself enough to meet yourself where you're at. And I think a lot of people tend to do that. They don't actually meet themselves where they're at because the pain or the implications, say they've been wronged, to actually go, you did me wrong. If someone else, robbed, stealed, or harmed them, that can be so painful to work through that
Mm-hmm.
you need enough love to be able to work through it because otherwise you just
Yes.
can't get over the barrier.
Yes. It is definitely a very courageous and brave thing we do looking at ourselves.
I'd argue it's the bravest.
It is. I totally agree. And I've said it many times. It's like sometimes it's just the fucking hardest thing I've ever had to do. And yet it's also been the very best thing I've ever done because like you, I can imagine you don't want to go back to that disconnection. You don't want to go back to living in that pain. You don't want to go back to living and pretending that all is fine when it isn't, when it's not right on the inside. Our bodies know. Our soul
Yeah.
knows, our bodies know. And it's getting our attention. Sometimes it takes decades to be able to have the wherewithal to say, okay, you're getting my attention. What is it? Some people never ever are able to do that. Some do.
Well, this is also the case. Like sometimes it just takes a long time to slowly process because they have to give it enough energy, enough love, really. And that might come through in time. But also sometimes people can be in situations that are incredibly complex and
Yeah.
multidimensional in how you even begin to resolve them.
Yeah.
And most people who immediately look outside of themselves, you like you did this or you raised me wrong, or this created a lot of stress for me. It's not wrong to connect with that, but ultimately it will never get you the answer you're seeking.
No.
You have to turn it inwards, and that's why, yeah, as you mentioned,
Yes.
there is a
Yeah.
courageousness to it as well. But that's the problem. Most people are addicted to comfort, and comfort is really it's a new type of killer. Um,
Yeah.
Learn to become uncomfortable with just confronting yourself. I love to make jokes and poke humor at myself, and that helps me a lot. Just tone down the ego and humble me a bit.
Yes. Yes. Daniel, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad that you joined me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been absolutely wonderful, and I've loved it. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. And so, friend, if you're listening and this conversation stirred something in you, I invite you to take a moment to pause, reflect, and ask, what in this was for me? Because there was something got your attention, and just lean in. What was for you? You can find all the links to Daniel in the show notes. And until next time, keep leaning into your truth and honoring your journey. This is Brenda Stott Tomlinson, and you're listening to Mind, Body, Soul Mastery.